I love June, Nation. It's an awesome month. We've had two albums that were nearly 10 out of 10s. One that definitely is. The second one, it's still in question. It's the height of baseball season. Great time to be outside. My birthday's this month. But of course, last year, we had Olid Divinium and Sanus. We had Dedicated to Chaos by Queensryche, and we had Gold Cobra by Limp Bizkit. But right now, we have Nile at the gates of SETHU. Primed to hopefully make June continue to be a fantastic month, considering we've had to talk about albums such as Living Things by Linkin Park and Justin Bieber's Believe. So what about this album? The Nile is a classic technical death metal band that has Egyptian themes. They are, I can't even say the word, but basically it translates to penis metal. It's really kind of funny, but traditionally this is a band that's a technical death metal band that has a lot of Egyptian themes within their music, a lot of Middle Eastern styles musically, and of course it is the brainchild and real masterpiece of Carl Sanders. And these guys are infinitely classic here in the metal scene. Their last album, for those who the gods detest, was an instant classic that was released a couple of years ago. They've released albums such as Annihilations of the Wicked that have been great, and before that and after that, of course, I mean, just a really, really great band. So with a new album coming out here in 2012, that is primed to mean that June's going to be an absolutely fantastic, stellar month that perhaps may not be a month that can be touched ever since last September, whenever we had Opeth and Megadeth and Dream Theater and Mastodon and all sorts of other stuff. So yeah, then you listen to the album, and then something creeps into your brain that just feels completely and terribly wrong. Something is not right in Nile land. Something isn't right and dandy in the land of the pharaohs, known as South Carolina. Somewhere along the lines, Nile opted to choose a producer, a mixer, rather, who apparently was drunk. The mix on this album is going to be my biggest principal complaint. Now, I know that that's not, and it has nothing to do with the music, but in a way it does, so bear with me. Musically, this album is fine. It's a little underwhelming considering what Nile's put out in the past. So it's not necessarily going to be maybe at the same degree or the same echelon as we've heard on previous records, but musically, it's not also that far off. So it's not like they took a large backseat. They didn't backpedal that far like Morbid Angel had last year, or Queensryche has done since Promised Land. I don't care who you are. That's how I think. Deal with it. It's just that the mix on this is really the most wavering pile of nonsense here. The vocals are in these random-ass locations. They're incredibly high up on the mix. The lead is extremely high up on the mix. The bass and drums are kind of mired below the muck. The solos, you can hear them, but at the same time, it's kind of understated. And it just seems off. You listen to this album and you understand this. You listen to it and you're just kind of like, what's wrong here? The vocals also have a strange characteristic to them as well, and I'm going to go with a basic comparison. Track number 1 off of their last album was a song called Kafir, and it was fantastic. It was brilliant. It was aggressive. It was brutal. You know, everything was in your face. It was like an anthem. Then you get the track 1 off of this album, and all of a sudden you feel like you're in some sort of jumbled up bingo tumbler. Vocals are just being excreted at random periods of time. It really feels out of place. It's very disjointed. It's distracting. It really is distracting. You know, the music that's flowing behind it is you know, it's good stuff. It's good tech death. It's solid tech death. But the vocals just are absolutely running amok all over this track. And since the mix is so high for the vocals, it is so damningly obvious to tell. It's so damningly in your face that it just really is an adjutant as opposed to being a propellant for a fantastic track, a fantastic starter. Right there is whenever I knew that this was going to be a long experience for me, because it was just such a disjointing feeling that I just didn't have a very, very good hunch that the remainder of the record was going to be much better, because it's very, very rare that a mix is just really, really bad on one song and on others ends up being just fine. this album is kind of just an enigmatic mess. I don't know if it's purely just the mix, because like I said, musically it's not bad. Vocally, it really could be better. It really could be better vocally. I'm not complaining about the vocal style. It's the same one that they've employed. However, it just seems that the arrangements for some of these songs was just either poorly constructed, or they tried to take the technical aspect of it to a new degree, and in doing so, in adding an additional layer of complexity, maybe taking it to the second power, or cubing it, or taking it to the 10th power, they made it actually a little too complex, to the point where it just, at some locations, doesn't sound proper or right, or it doesn't sound natural, I guess is the best way to put it. Proper and right are bad adjectives to use. Whenever I listen to this record, I feel it more as background noise than rather the soundtrack to a mood that I'm in, or a soundtrack to some sort of Egyptian story, or anything like that. I don't have that same feeling. I don't have the same connection to this album as I have with some of their other works, and it's really disappointing, because I had high hopes for this record, because Nile has always been a band that's been able to deliver. And what's really kind of baffling to me about this is that it's almost like the band is not to blame here. In reality, if the mix had been a little bit more balanced, if everything would have been a little bit better off, and a little bit less disjointed and more connected, then this would be an album that you could say that Nile did deliver. But instead, I have to say that they kind of didn't, because they had to have listened to this after the mix was done and said to themselves, this is satisfactory. This is what we're going to put our name on and sell to our fans and to the metal elite. And I gotta say, it's disappointing. It's something that is so damning. It's almost like the last two tracks of the latest Fear Factory album, The Industrialist, where it's a fantastic album until you get to those last two tracks, and that just damns the album to just being a good album as opposed to being a stellar album. This is an album that honestly could have been very good, but because of the shoddy mixing, because things just feel really out of place, it instead becomes damned. It instead becomes just sort of average, run-of-the-mill. It becomes very hard to really praise this, because it's kind of tedious and trialsome just to get through it without losing your sanity. I hate to say this about Nile, because I respect this band, I enjoy this band, they are definitely amongst my faves, but I have to give this album an honest-to-God 6.75 out of 10. The mix really is that damning for me. It would not be a bad record if that weren't the case. But that's not the case. So, unfortunately, this is the fate that befalls it. I wouldn't necessarily call this the worst record of the year, or the worst since I lived of Vinnie Mansanis. I think Queensryche had that covered easily. Lulu also did it. Attack Attack and Demure, almost too easy. Justin Bieber, not even on the radar. I will say, however, though, that this is an album that kind of defeated itself due to personnel that weren't even holding an instrument. The only instrument that was being held was, well, actually not even being held at all. It was in front of him. All he had to do was turn some knobs. All he had to do was raise and lower some key nodules, and this album would have been a classic. Instead, it is not.